Hello there. Thanks for joining us for Talking Europe. I'm Catherine Nicholson. Now, here in France, right now we're in a period of political limbo, a week on from the first round of the presidential election, and just the incumbent Emmanuel Macron and far-right leader Marine Le Pen are still in the race. The two have very different visions for France, for its role in Europe, indeed in the world. They also have very different relationships with Vladimir Putin. Marine Le Pen insisting this week that France can re-normalise relations with the Russian president in future, this even as evidence of more potential war crimes against Ukrainian civilians is uncovered. Well, with us to unpack the first round of the election, what the outcome of the second round could mean for France, Europe and beyond, Jacques Rupnik, who is research professor at the Centre for International Studies at Paris's esteemed Sciences Po University. Jacques Rupnik, thank you very much for being with us.
Pleasure.
So we've got a lot to talk about and not much time to do it in. Let's just start with the first round results. Something that's been particularly remarked outside of France is the fact that 33% of people in France gave their vote on Sunday last week to one of three candidates from the far right. How has this come about?
Well, I think the main explanation has to do with the failure of the mainstream right. It had a candidate, Valérie Pécresse, who unfortunately imploded during the campaign. And so that's one of the explanations. The mainstream right didn't do its job, so to speak. And then you have a second thing, which is probably deeper, which is a growing dissatisfaction in part of the French population with the way institutions work. And there is this is related to a broader trend we have seen elsewhere, the rise of populist movements who challenge not just established parties, but also thrive on the rejection of elites and existing institutions. And that's, I think, the second component. You know, it goes from Trump in America to Bolsonaro. Some people range even the Brexit vote in that category. Yeah, this is a protest vote against the status quo.
Marine Le Pen has focused her early campaigning before the first round on cost of living and a lot of economic policies that many people would consider to be left of centre. When you read her campaign manifesto, though, there are still policies we've heard less about from her, like giving French nationals precedence over foreign residents in France for things like housing. There would also be fines for women who wear the Muslim headscarf or veil anywhere in public. Has Marine really changed her positions, as many seem to have perceived, or has she changed her messaging?
She has changed very much her style. It's much less abrasive. She's trying to present herself as, more of a mainstream politician. But of course, if you look closely at her program, and you have referred to some of its aspects, it retains the old core of the earlier Front National, which was essentially an anti-immigrant party. Now it has broadened its appeal by addressing the social question. Consider that basically what you had, governments from center-right and center-left were in power, but they were more or less following the same policies, and that was given by constraints given by the European Union, by the Maastricht Treaty, Eurozone, etc. And so there is this attempt to fill a gap on the social question and attract an electorate that used to vote on the left, that used to be voting either for the Communist Party or for the Socialists. And so she has been quite successful in that respect. She's now very much campaigning on social issue, cost of living, etc. You know, there is Macron got the limelight because of the war in Ukraine. So he was on the front, he was on the news, he was present, at least in the first phase of the war. She's not talking about the war. She's talking about the consequences of the war. And I'm going to be protecting you from the consequences of the war in cost of living. I will block the price of energy. I will block the price of gas. I will block, I will stop inflation, basically. She's a magician. She will stop inflation, or more or less. So that's part of her skillful shift from what used to be a very specific far-right agenda on immigration to something that addresses the social issues, very real issues that many voters care for.
Let's speak specifically about some international affairs. Marine Le Pen has been for a long time an open admirer of Vladimir Putin. She made no secret of that. But recently she destroyed more than 1 million campaign leaflets featuring a smiling picture of herself with the Russian president. Just last week, Marine Le Pen gave an interview to French TV in which she repeated her position that the referendum on the status of Crimea, which happened after its annexation, means that the territory is part of Russia. Now, you and I know that referendum was condemned at the United Nations and elsewhere as illegitimate. What would it mean for Ukraine and for France's relations with Russia if Marine Le Pen won, do you think?
Well, it would mean that basically that the unity of the Europeans in their response to the war in Ukraine would be undermined. So that's already the united response that we have seen, the sanctions, etc. She's opposed to sanctions. So that's already one thing. And the second thing is she would, in due course, try not just to reestablish contacts with Russia, but also pursue what Russia is really interested in, and that is an alliance of right-wing nationalist sovereignist parties in Europe that goes from Viktor Orban to Kaczynski in Poland, to Salvini in Italy, Marine Le Pen, and there's a whole range of them. This alliance that is basically meant to weaken and undermine, and in due course even completely dissolve the European Union. That is the Russian agenda, and she doesn't mind playing that part in that agenda.
Looking at the first round results, so we had the far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who came in just behind Marine Le Pen. He and Marine Le Pen, both to different degrees, want a change at the European Union. They want distancing of France from NATO. Jean-Luc Mélenchon wants to come out of NATO. So even if Emmanuel Macron does win the second round, there was more than 40% of French voters supporting these candidates with these policies. Does he have to change his stance on the EU and on NATO if he wins?
He will not, because he's very upfront about that. There are candidates who perhaps have a European agenda and a NATO agenda and prefer not to talk about it too much. Okay, there are some. But that's not the case for Macron. He did exactly the opposite. He knows that Le Pen or Mélenchon on the left are, let's say, skeptical about the EU. They are sort of, for different reasons, they are, you would call them Eurosceptics. And they also would like French to distance themselves from NATO. Le Pen just spoke about leaving the integrated military command of NATO. Macron is the exact opposite. Macron said, I believe that the only way we can confront the major problems of our times, and that can be war in the East, it can be the environment, it can be migration. Take any of the major issues we are confronted with, you cannot deal with them. Even for larger countries like France or Germany, we cannot deal with them on our own. It has to be a European response. So Macron would be the exact opposite, and he doesn't mind this kind of confrontation because he knows that at the end of the day, the overwhelming majority of the French population thinks the European Union is a good thing. And they remember that last time when he had to face Marine Le Pen, she was in favor of leaving the EU and leaving the euro. Well, nobody wanted to see that happen. She withdrew that part of her program, but people have memory and they know that in a different way she's proposing something along those lines.
Jacques Rupnik, we will have to end our interview there, but thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll come back to this topic after the second round of the French election. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before we leave you, time for our regular fact-check segment, Fact or Fake. This time we're looking into false claims about a Central European NATO state supposedly becoming pro-Russian.
Has Slovakia opposed NATO, and is it turning towards Russia? That's the false claim made using this video post on Twitter on the 10th of March. In it, two Slovakian politicians pour a bottle of water on a Ukrainian flag. The author of the tweet claims this is proof that the EU and NATO member state Slovakia is opposing NATO and supporting Russia.
Slowly but surely, one by one, the countries turn towards Russia. Slovakia says no to NATO.
The tweet circulated, and in Serbia alone it was shared more than 20,000 times. But a simple internet keyword search pinpoints when it took place. This article from the Slovak Spectator reports that the water pouring incident happened on February the 9th, 2022, as the parliament voted on a defence cooperation agreement that had just been signed by the US and Slovakian foreign ministers. This is a deal outlining the potential use of Slovakian air bases by the US, its NATO partner. The debate happened a fortnight before Russia invaded Ukraine, when Russian troops were already amassed on the Ukrainian border. Individual MPs in the flag incident have previously supported closer ties with Russia, but at no point in the protests was there any reference to turning towards Moscow. The MPs involved in the flag protest were from nationalist parties and were opposed to the Defence Operation Agreement. However, the parliament voted to approve it. The Slovakian foreign minister has denied his country is distancing itself from NATO. In a tweet published on March the 10th, his ministry criticised Russia for aggression against Ukraine and said NATO troops will strengthen our defence. Slovakia is not opposing NATO and has recently accepted the presence of a NATO battle group on its territory.
Fact or Fake there by Sophie Semai and Georgina Robertson. Thank you very much for watching Talking Europe. We'll see you soon.